The moment she walked through that door, I saw it, the guilt in her eyes. She had no idea I knew, but I did. And tonight, everything was about to change. For years, I believed I had everything: a loving wife, a happy home, a life that felt solid and unshakable. Lyra and I had been together for almost a decade, and through every challenge, every high and low, we had always been a team. At least that's what I thought. She was my best friend, the person who knew me better than anyone. I trusted her with every part of me, never questioning her love or loyalty. We had built a life together, a home filled with laughter, memories, and quiet moments that felt like forever. I can still picture those nights, sitting on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder as we watched some movie neither of us were really paying attention to. The way she'd reach for my hand in the middle of the night, even in her sleep, as if she needed to know I was still there. The little notes she used to leave on the fridge: "Have a good day, love you." Small things, but they meant everything. Then, without warning, things changed. It wasn't dramatic, not at first, just little shifts, so small they barely seemed worth noticing. The way she started staying late at work more often. The moments she seemed distant, like she was lost in a world I wasn't part of. The way she started sleeping with her phone under her pillow when she had never cared about it before. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. After all, Lyra wasn't just my wife, she was my person. The one who had always been honest with me, always made me feel safe. But doubts have a way of creeping in, don't they? And once they take root, they grow. One night, she was supposed to be working late again. I was sitting alone at the dinner table, staring at the untouched plate of food in front of me, when my phone buzzed. A notification from our shared location app. I had never checked it before, never felt the need to, but something inside me made me look. She wasn't at the office. My stomach twisted as I stared at the screen, at the small, blinking dot that showed her location. It wasn't a restaurant, it wasn't a friend's house. It was a residential address across town, a place I had never heard of. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she had a reason, maybe it was nothing. But deep down, I knew. I sat there for hours, waiting. When she finally came home, she smiled at me like nothing had happened, kissed my cheek, told me she was exhausted from all the meetings. And I smiled back, pretended I believed her, because she had no idea I knew. And from that moment on, everything changed. Denial is a strange thing. Even when the truth is staring you in the face, part of you clings to the hope that you're wrong, that there's another explanation, that the person you love couldn't betray you like this. For days I tried to convince myself that it was nothing. Maybe Lyra had a work-related reason for being at that house. Maybe she was helping a friend. Maybe I was just imagining things, but deep down I knew. Once doubt takes root, you start noticing everything. And I noticed everything. She started taking longer showers, not just a few extra minutes, but long enough that I could hear her phone buzzing in the other room, messages she didn't want to read in front of me. Her perfume was stronger on nights when she barely spoke to me. I caught her smiling at her phone, only for her expression to shift when she saw me watching. She used to be so open, always telling me little things about her day, what made her laugh, what annoyed her, even what she had for lunch. But now there were gaps in her stories, missing pieces, vague answers. I tried asking her directly once. "You've been working late a lot," I said casually one evening. She barely looked up from her plate. "Yeah, things have been busy." I watched her carefully. "Where exactly is your office again?" She laughed, a little too quickly. "You know where it is." I did. And I also knew she hadn't been there that night. That was when I made up my mind. I needed proof, real proof. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One night she was in the shower and her phone was lying on the nightstand, face down like it always was lately. But this time it vibrated. A message flashed across the screen. I hesitated. I had never been the kind of person to go through her phone. I believed in trust, in privacy. But that trust was already shattered, wasn't it? I picked it up. My hands were shaking. I didn't just find one message, I found dozens. A thread of conversations with a name I didn't recognize. Messages filled with words that made my stomach turn. I miss you. Tonight was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. My chest tightened. My fingers gripped the phone so hard I thought it might crack. Every late night, every excuse, every moment I had ignored. It was all there, in black and white, the proof I had been avoiding. I placed the phone back exactly where I found it. When she stepped out of the shower, smiling like nothing had changed, I forced myself to act normal, because she still had no idea I knew, and I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. Not until I decided how this was going to end. The hardest part wasn't knowing the truth. It was pretending I didn't. Every morning I woke up next to her, feeling like I was sleeping beside a stranger. Every kiss, every touch, every "I love you" felt like a cruel joke. But I played my part because I needed time. I needed to be sure of what I was going to do. I had always thought if something like this ever happened, I'd react with rage, yelling, breaking things, demanding answers. But I didn't feel anger. I felt something colder. I felt calculated. So I started watching her carefully. I needed to understand how long this had been going on, how deep the betrayal ran. I checked our phone records. She had been calling him almost daily, sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for hours, and always when I wasn't home. I checked her location history. That house, the one I had seen on the map, wasn't a one-time visit. She had been going there for weeks, maybe months. I went as far as driving past it one night, just to see, just to confirm what I already knew. And sure enough, her car was parked in the driveway, right next to his. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to storm in there, to make her see what she had done to me. But I didn't. Because I wanted to control how this ended, so I started planning. That night I acted normal when she came home. I kissed her on the forehead, asked how her day was, pretended I didn't already know exactly where she had been. She smiled, told me she was exhausted from work. I almost laughed. Instead I asked, "Got any plans tomorrow night?" She hesitated just for a second. "Yeah, a late meeting." "A late meeting," I nodded. "All right, I'll probably just have a quiet night in then." She kissed my cheek and went to shower. And that was when I set my trap. I printed everything, the messages, the call logs, the locations, laid them all out on the dining table, one by one, undeniable pieces of evidence, the truth waiting for her to face it. Then I packed my bag, because this wasn't going to be a conversation, this wasn't going to be a fight, this was going to be an ending. The next night she left as expected, and I waited. Hours passed. My heart pounded in my chest, but my hands were steady. I knew exactly what I was going to do. When I heard her car pull into the driveway, I didn't move. I just listened to the sound of her footsteps as she approached the door. She had no idea what she was about to walk into, and I was ready to watch it all unfold. The front door creaked open, and I heard her heels click against the hardwood floor. She walked in, humming softly like it was just another night, like she hadn't spent the last few hours in another man's arms. I stayed silent, waiting. "Hey, you still up?" she called out, her voice light, unaware. I didn't answer. She took a few steps in, then stopped. I knew the exact moment she saw it, the papers I had laid out on the dining table, the printed messages, the call logs, the locations, a perfect timeline of her lies, a sharp inhale, the sound of her bag dropping to the floor. What is this?" she whispered. Slowly I stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. I watched as she stood frozen, her hands shaking as she reached for one of the papers. "You tell me," I said, my voice eerily calm. She looked up at me, panic flickering in her eyes. I don't know what this is." I let out a cold laugh. "Really? Because it looks pretty clear to me." Her eyes darted across the table, scanning the evidence. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like she was scrambling for an excuse, for a lie that could make this all disappear. "I can explain," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I tilted my head. "Go ahead, Lyra. Explain." She hesitated. She knew there was no way out of this. Every excuse she could come up with would crumble under the weight of the truth in front of her. Tears welled up in her eyes. "It wasn't..." She stopped, swallowing hard. "It didn't mean anything," I scoffed. "Didn't mean anything?" I took a step closer, my voice sharp now. "So all those messages, the secret meetings, the nights you came home lying to my face, none of it meant anything?" She wiped at her eyes, but she couldn't stop the tears from falling. "I never wanted to hurt you." I shook my head, my chest tightening. "But you did, over and over again." She reached out, like she wanted to touch me, to make me believe in whatever lie she was about to tell next. But I stepped back. "I need you to listen to me," she pleaded. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I've listened to your lies for long enough." She stared at me, her lips trembling. I could see the regret now, the realization that this was real, that she had destroyed everything. But regret didn't change the past. I exhaled slowly, my heart pounding, my decision already made. "This isn't our home anymore," I said quietly. "I won't live in a place built on lies." And with that, I turned and walked away. She gasped, "Wait, please, don't go." But I didn't stop, because the person I had loved, the person I thought I knew, was already gone. The front door creaked open, and I heard her heels click against the hardwood floor. She walked in, humming softly like it was just another night, like she hadn't spent the last few hours in another man's arms. I stayed silent, waiting. "Hey, you still up?" she called out, her voice light, unaware. I didn't answer. She took a few steps in, then stopped. I knew the exact moment she saw it. The papers I had laid out on the dining table, the printed messages, the call logs, the locations, a perfect timeline of her lies, a sharp inhale, the sound of her bag dropping to the floor. What is this?" she whispered. Slowly I stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. I watched as she stood frozen, her hands shaking as she reached for one of the papers. "You tell me," I said, my voice eerily calm. She looked up at me, panic flickering in her eyes. I don't know what this is." I let out a cold laugh. "Really? Because it looks pretty clear to me." Her eyes darted across the table, scanning the evidence. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like she was scrambling for an excuse, for a lie that could make this all disappear. "I can explain," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped outside, the cold night air hitting my skin like a wake-up call. My chest felt tight, my heart heavy, but my mind was clear. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't drowning in doubt. I knew exactly what I needed to do. Behind me, the door swung open. "Please, don't do this," Lyra's voice cracked as she stepped onto the porch. She was barefoot, still in the dress she had worn for him. The sight of her, desperate, pleading, should have made me feel something. But I felt nothing. I turned slowly, meeting her tear-streaked face. "You already did this, Lyra." Her breath hitched, her hands shaking as she reached for me. "It was a mistake. I swear I didn't mean for it to happen." I shook my head. You don't accidentally betray someone. You don't accidentally lie for months. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I love you. I almost laughed. Almost. No, you don't. My voice was quiet but firm. You loved me once, maybe, but you don't do this to someone you love. She shook her head violently. I was lost, I was confused, but I never stopped loving you. Love isn't confusion, I said. Love is a choice, and every single time you chose him. Silence. Nothing but the distant hum of the streetlights and the sound of her quiet, broken breaths. She had no words left. I reached for the bag I had packed earlier and slung it over my shoulder. This was it. The final moment. The last time I would ever stand in this doorway as her husband. I could have yelled. I could have begged for answers. I could have stayed and let her break me piece by piece. But instead, I turned around and walked down the steps. She didn't chase me. She didn't have to. Because as much as it hurt, we both knew the truth. This was over. I reached my car and opened the door, pausing for a moment, taking one last breath of the life I was leaving behind. Then, without another word, I got in and drove away. The road stretched ahead dark and endless, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I wasn't looking back, because this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new one. Sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do. What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments.